I am Parnika. Once. Sorry, just give me a minute, please. Yes, hi. Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. So sorry about that. Okay, thank you so much for joining tonight. Since you all are aware that today is Suicide Prevention Day. So that is what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, I want to know a bit about you all, and I want to know that your main reason for joining today's workshop. So if you all could just quickly use your chat boxes and just tell me what was the main reason for you all to join this workshop today. Yeah, I'm waiting. This has to be interactive.
From counseling purpose, most these days, so many cases are we are looking forward to see like in adults also and students also. So that is the main reason to understand how to help them.
Okay, all right. Understood, understood. Thank you for that response. So I think also what would be a bit more, yeah, thank you so much for your responses. Okay, all right. Okay, understood. So also I would want to know from you all that did you all join this for professional reasons or personal reasons? Just when I mean,
मैम
yeah,
Professional na.
personal.
मैम मैं वैसे काउंसलिंग साइकोलॉजिस्ट हूँ तो मेरे को तो वैसे भी सीखना है। अभी हाल में मैंने मास्टर्स कंप्लीट किया है और तो इस वजह से।
Okay, अच्छा,
और मैम
thank you.
मैं आपके ग्रुप से जुड़ा था, मेरे एक फ्रेंड हैं
Hmm.
तो उन्होंने मुझे बताया था कि इसमें आपको साइकोलॉजी की बहुत सारी अच्छी चीज़ें मिलेंगी, बुक्स मिलेंगी, तो दैट्स व्हाई आई एम थैंकफुल फॉर यू
Okay.
मैम।
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so as I can see here that most of you have joined here for professional reasons. All right, so I will try to keep this workshop in that line. That's the main reason I was also
और
asking
मैम
you.
एक चीज़ और थी, एक्चुअली
बोलिए.
ना जो मैं देखता हूँ यूथ खासतौर पे चर्च, अभी ना कुछ
जी,
दिनों पहले तक मैं पीजीटी मैथ था, तो जो बड़े बच्चे हैं तो
जी,
उनको ना वो स्ट्रेस में बहुत रहते हैं। उनका जो स्ट्रेस है बेसिकली मतलब पढ़ाई का भी होता है और पढ़ाई के अलावा ना दूसरी चीजों से ज्यादा जो यूथ है, यंग एज के जो बच्चे हैं, उन
जी.
जो 16 से लेकर 25 तक के जो कॉलेजेस में पढ़ रहे हैं, मतलब पढ़ाई तो मेरे ख्याल में पढ़ाई का तो मुझे लगता नहीं कोई स्ट्रेस है, पर पढ़ाई के अलावा उन्हें दुनिया भर के स्ट्रेस हैं।
Hmm.
तो उनकी हेल्प के लिए मैं चाहता हूँ कि जो बच्चे जैसे किसी एग्जाम में फेल होते हैं बैक टू बैक
जी,
और वो
जी,
गलत कदम उठा लेते हैं, तो उनकी हम किस तरह से हेल्प कर पाएंगे मैम?
जी. ठीक है. ओके, बहुत अच्छी बात आपने बोली. थैंक यू रिस्पॉन्स देने के लिए. So see, before we start, मैं आप लोग को ये बता दूँ कि today's workshop would be more of a conversation. तो इससे थैंक यू सो मच जनक कि आपने ऑलरेडी वो चीज़ स्टार्ट की है. सो इट विल बी एन इंटरैक्शन, इट विल बी अ कॉन्वर्सेशन जिससे हम एक दूसरे के एक्सपीरियंसेस स्टोरी शेयरिंग से सीख पाए बेटर.
जी मैम।
ऑलराइट, सो लेट मी शेयर माय स्क्रीन फर्स्ट. ओके, सो इज माय स्क्रीन विजिबल टू एवरीवन?
जी मैम।
ठीक है, थैंक यू सो मच. एंड आप सबसे मुझे एक और रिक्वेस्ट है कि आप अपना माइक्रोफोन बंद रखें जब भी आपको कुछ बोलना है तो आपको. ओके, ऑल राइट. So whenever you want to say anything, you feel free to turn it on and you can always contribute, you can always say anything, because this is again a conversational workshop, so you don't even need to raise your hand for it. But if you are not speaking, then I would request everyone to keep your microphones turned off. And if someone is speaking, I would also request you all to respect that person, whether it's me or anyone else, and don't speak over anyone. Let that person finish or take a pause before you jump in. All right? Okay. So before we start, let's talk a bit about Sophiana Loka, right? So this workshop is brought to you by Sophiana Loka, and I have been connected with them for some time now, and I really appreciate this initiative because they totally believe in nurturing both physical and mental health. They have that approach, and they are trying to actually empower people and professionals to gain more knowledge, to be their best versions. And if they can be their best versions, that is when they can help others as well, right? So I'm grateful for Sophiana Loka that way. And a bit about myself, I'm Parnika. I'm a clinical psychologist and a psychotherapist, and I've been practicing for 6 years. And I have my own mental health organization known as Empathica as well. So I offer therapeutic services and my own set of workshops and courses there as well. Now, let's begin with today's main topic, right? So, as you all know, that today's topic is about suicide prevention, right? So, before we get into suicide prevention, we all are aware that there are a lot of myths around suicide. So, first, I would like to know from you all, I'd like everyone to try and share one myth that you have heard about suicide, or one statement that you've heard about suicide that you are not sure whether it's a myth or fact. That's also okay. You can either type your responses in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and just let me know. Both is absolutely fine. Okay, all right. Bunny, go ahead. I see your hand raised.
Okay, so one myth is that the person who is suicidal does not tell anyone that he or she is suicidal.
Hmm. Yes, thank you for that response. And would you like to, combat that myth with a fact? What do you think actually happens?
I'm not 100% sure, but well, according to what I have studied in my recent classes, is that they tell you in matlab like in mid conversations, or somehow indirectly they tell you that they feel like ending up their lives. There is no reason to live, and all. So they give you hints that they are suicidal, but maybe we do not catch it somehow.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bunny. You're absolutely right. This is definitely a myth that people do not talk about it, or people don't let anyone know. You very rightly pointed out a lot of times we are not able to catch those hints. But if you look closely, there are hints. Those hints might not be that clear, where a person might come out and say that, listen, I actually am thinking of harming myself. That also happens in a lot of cases, and people just take it too lightly. We'll get into that in some time. But even if it's not that, there are subtle hints, and we will get into those hints later also. So yes, this is definitely a myth. And let's say it's also important to understand that every human is different, right? So now I won't say that everyone who thinks of committing suicide or ends up committing suicide uh, always gives some sort of hints. There could be a very small percentage where there were actually no signs. So that also exists. But if we talk in a general sense, this statement is a myth because most people do give hints. So thank you so much for sharing this with all of us today, Bunny. Okay, so on the chat box, I see Isha mentions that one myth is that people do it for attention. All right, that is a very, very valid point. Thank you so much for sharing that, Isha. So, this is there that people do it for attention. Now, there is another very important aspect here. Okay, if we talk about this, do people do it for attention, especially if they're harming themselves, right? Have you all heard of the term non suicidal self harm?
Yes, ma'am.
Any? Okay. All right. So basically, non-suicidal self-harm, as the name itself suggests, is the kind of self-harm where the person does not actually intend to take their lives, right? But they are harming themselves. Now, why does that happen? We'll get into that in a moment. But the point is, usually in the case of non-suicidal self-harm, or in the case where people explicitly talk about their suicidal ideation or intention, people might think that they're doing it for attention. Now, yes, in a lot of cases, people might do it for attention, but the most important thing is that this is not negative attention. For example, if I am hurting, right, as humans, all humans, we have. Why do you think that when we are in pain, when we are in physical pain, or we suddenly get hurt, we end up yelling, right? If suddenly there is a broken glass piece and I step on it, I will say something, a shriek, a sound will come out of my mouth, right? If there is constant body ache, or people would be like, bahut dard ho raha hai. This happens, right? This is an actual mechanism in our body. We end up drawing attention to it because until and unless we do not draw attention to it, how will we get help? Humans are supposed to be social animals. We're supposed to be dependent on each other. So this is also a way of telling people around us that, okay, we need help, or this thing needs attention. So in a lot of cases, in a lot of psychological problems, what happens is, if you are actually feeling struggling so hard, right, it might be a cry for help, but it's not negative attention. You are screaming for attention, that please look at me. Maybe not intentionally. It's not like, oh, I want to disturb them, or I just want people to pay more attention to me. It's just like, I am really struggling here. No one is understanding. Maybe if I'm vocal enough, or when I'm actually doing certain acts, people might understand how severe it is and they might come to help me. So, in a lot of cases, that is the kind of attention that people are going for. And people often misunderstand that. So, thank you so much, Isha, for raising this point. That was a very helpful point. Now, the other comment on the chat box is, people who commit suicide are weak. Oh, yes. This one is something worth talking about. And don't worry, I'll come to all your responses. I'll come to all the raised hands. But I think it's important to give all the myths some time and discuss them. Okay. So now, when people say that people who commit suicide are weak, now it completely depends on what is your definition of weak. What do you mean by weak? Humans in general cannot be weak or strong. It's as simple as that. You can be strong in one area, weak in other area. It's something as simple as someone being physically weak but extremely smart, or someone being weak at one activity but being doing exceptionally well at other activity. Same way, if they are suicidal or if they're struggling with that, of course there is some sort of weakness. But why is weakness a negative term and an overgeneralized term? Just because they're struggling in one area. When you talk about struggle, that means they're not able to do something that everyone else is easily able to do. They're not able to cope with something that others around them are able to cope with, right? So if you look at it that way, you can say that yes, they are weak. But the problem with this term in itself is the overgeneralization of it. That doesn't mean that they're weak in all areas of life, number one. Number two, we need to be extremely careful with our words, because most of the times when people are struggling and people are having suicidal ideations, they feel a lot of shame and guilt. A lot of shame and guilt is with them. And in that case, if you call someone weak, ki, do not be weak, you have to be strong. So what happens? Their mind tells them that I was right about myself. That shame and guilt increases. That, okay, yes, I am weak. Maybe I don't deserve to live at all because I can't even deal with this. So when you use such terms, and especially in public forums or even in conversing, right, a lot of times with best of intentions, people say that, you know, don't be weak. I know you're stronger than this. But when you use terms like weak and strong, your intentions might be the purest. But it just tells the person, if you say, I know you're stronger than this, or you have to be strong, the person is like, oh, yes, she also agrees that I'm not strong. I was right about myself. If I'm not strong, then what's the point of any of it? So we need to be very, very careful about the words that we use. And there's I would also like to take a moment to add this. There's this one line that I had heard. This line I'd actually heard in one of the TV shows, and this actually stayed with me. And I feel it is so true, especially for therapists, psychologists, counselors, that if you want to be a good therapist, good counselor, and I think this also goes for teachers, the main thing is, apart from your texts, your theories, and understanding all of that, is the sense of responsibility and understanding how much weight your words can carry. So, how much we have to think before we say every word, every small word. So, it is something that is extremely important in that case. So, yes, I really wanted to give this some time. And if you guys do not mind, I would like to elaborate a bit on the kinds of words to use in general. We will come back to all the myths and facts. So, if you do not mind on me elaborating on that, can I get a thumbs up? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So now there is one instance that I'd like to share with you all. So I think all of us, even therapists, psychologists, we all make mistakes, and the only way to actually grow is when we understand from those mistakes and understand the impact that our words can have on people. So I remember two such instances from my personal experience. One was, so usually whenever I start my first session with anyone, so understand that any counselor or psychologist would understand that there is a lot of history taking in the first session, and a lot of these questions might seem very redundant or pointless to the other person. So usually when I start those sessions, I mention that to the person that this session would be about me collecting information. I'm going to ask you some questions. Some of them might seem pointless to you, but I would want you to be patient because it's important. And I used to start my sessions like this earlier. And once, while doing the same introduction, I actually ended up saying that, some of these questions might seem stupid to you, and the client stopped me there and then and said that, why do you say stupid? And I was like, no, I mean that it might come across as stupid, but it has a rationale, it has a reason. But a lot of times when I ask a lot of questions, you might have come with some intention of talking about something. And if these questions are not in that line, you might think that they are pointless. So then the client is like, okay. And then I did realize that, okay, I triggered something. So I stopped with the questioning and I tried to explore that. And then the client actually told me that it just felt to me that you are telling me that because I am not smart enough to understand the rationale of those questions, I will think they are stupid because you're calling me stupid. So this is one example of how important our words are. So now our words are so important in normal conversations and normal therapeutic conversations. Now imagine if a person is actually going through self-harm or suicide, how much more weight it carries. So this is something that we have to be extremely careful of, and also understanding the insecurities that person has. So that is why why do we place so much importance on listening, on active listening, is because until unless we do not actively listen and understand, we would never know the right words to say to a person, because something that's completely non-triggering to someone might be extremely triggering to someone else. That is why our job always starts with listening, so that we could understand how to communicate with this particular person, because there is no one rule book that tells us, okay, this is how we communicate to everyone. All right, so I hope this point that I was trying to make is clear to everyone. Can I see a thumbs up, please? Okay, thank you, Isha. Thank you. All right. Okay, so I see Janak's hand is raised. Yes, Janak, do you want to go on and add something?
मैम मुझे जो लगता था ना, मतलब ये कि खुदकुशी करते हैं लोग। मैम मैं हिंदी में बोल रहा हूँ, इसमें मतलब ठीक है?
आप हिंदी में बोल लीजिए। कुछ लोग को जो हिंदी में कंफर्टेबल नहीं है, उनके लिए मैं इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट कर दूंगी, आप बोलिए।
क्योंकि मैम मैं पूरी तरह से हिंदी में ही सहज हूँ मैं, तो इस से
मैं एकदम
तो मुझे जो लगता है ना मैम कि जब हम किसी के ऊपर कोई चीजें इम्पोज कर देते हैं, तो ये एक बड़ी वजह रहती है जिसकी वजह से ना लोग सुसाइड की ओर मतलब मूव ऑन करते हैं। लाइक जैसे किसान है हमारे, तो जब उनके ऊपर ब्याज जो होती है महंगी ब्याज पे उन्हें महाजन से वो मिलता है लोन। तो एक वजह होती है क्योंकि ज्यादातर किसान जो होते हैं वही लोग खुदकुशी करते हैं जिनके बहुत ज्यादा लोन होता है, जो रीपे करने में अनकेपेबल होते हैं, या फिर ऐसे स्टूडेंट्स जिनका ना स्ट्रीम सिलेक्शन गलत था और वो ब्रिलियंट होते हैं, बट वो जो सिलेक्शन था वो पेरेंट्स ने उस तरफ ध्यान नहीं दिया। और इस वजह से भी एक रीजन ये भी होता है कि वो जो है उनको मतलब जीवन उस पेपर को पास करने के कंपैरिजन में जीवन को खत्म करना ज्यादा आसान लगता है।
ओके, ठीक है।
तो
तो जी, इसमें आपका मेन पॉइंट या मेन क्वेश्चन आप क्या पूछना चाह रहे हैं?
तो मैम हम बच्चों के लिए मतलब कैसे हेल्प कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि बेसिकली ना मैंने स्कूल को अपने लिए चुन रखा है, मतलब स्कूल काउंसलिंग के लिए,
जी,
ताकि ना बच्चों को थोड़ा सा बेटर ऑप्शंस मिले।
okay, all right. ठीक है. So basically, for people who are not comfortable in Hindi, what Janak is saying is that a lot of times people do commit suicide because of societal conditions, because of things that are imposed on them. Whether it's about farmer suicide because of extreme poverty or those socio-political conditions, or it is student suicide because of the structural failure of the system or the failure of their parents to recognize their signs and support them in the best ways. So he is asking what can we do to help them. Now, the first thing here that I would like to add, another, I think that completely comes under the myths versus facts thing also, and it's also kind of a side topic, but this is something very important. That is, people do not actually commit suicide because of the situation. The situation is just a trigger. So now what Janak is saying, there could be structural problems, socioeconomic problems, or stressors, but those stressors in itself is never just the reason, because a lot of people go through the same stressors. Not everyone reacts that way, so people react differently. So in order to help someone, we have to understand what is making them react in this particular way to this stressor, not the event, but what are their thoughts behind it, what are their emotions behind this, what was their upbringing, what are their beliefs, what insecurities were hurt, what is their personality like. So we have to move a bit away from the situation and look at them as an individual and understand their own journey. This is the short response, Janak, and the long response would actually take hours. So we won't get into that right now, but I hope I somewhat answered your question. Okay. All right. So then someone says a person who has failed. Okay, this is also a very valid point, Chumuki. Thank you for this. A person who has failed in one method of self-harm doesn't try some other method. Okay, she also says she doesn't know whether it's true or it's a myth. It is a myth. A person who has failed in one method can definitely try another method. A lot of times people try multiple methods. But what happens is, at times when you are going through that, at times it's an impulse control issue, right? If it is an impulse control issue, it is, if it is just out of a particular impulse and a very strong emotion in that particular moment, and if it doesn't happen, then most probably you wouldn't try it again. But not all self-harm activities or suicidal ideations are impulse control issues. Again, I think this connects to Janak's point that we have to understand the motivations, thought processes of individuals and their personalities and their reasons for doing what they are doing. So, if, in speaking in general sense, this is definitely a myth because it doesn't apply to everyone. But yes, it does apply to a few people. That being said, we can never be sure about this. In such cases, it's best to always assume that a person can do it again, so that we provide continuous help to that person. Because what do we have to lose? We provide help. It might still benefit them in some way or the other. But if we withdraw the help, we have a lot to lose. So it's always better and more responsible to go with assuming that this is a myth and not a fact. All right. Then Vanshika says one myth is that we can't help the person who's suicidal. He or she or they will do it anyway. But the fact is that we can impact them. Yes, absolutely, Vanshika. This is a myth, but yes, we can definitely help them. We can definitely impact them, because most of the times when a person feels suicidal, it comes from a state of hopelessness, or absolute hopelessness, or it could be in connection to certain psychological disorders. We'll get into that. But if we understand the reasons and provide them with help, if we actually help them resolve or manage those reasons, then 100% we can impact their decision. Because humans in general, our default setting is we need to survive. We all have the survival instinct. Our survival instinct is always stronger than our death instinct. So we just have to find a way to make sure that that instinct again comes back up. So we can definitely help them. Then we have another here: suicidal thoughts because of comparison and pressure from surroundings instead of taking steps positive. Okay, all right. I am not very sure. Sriksha, could you unmute and explain your point to everyone? Or maybe me, maybe it's just me who's not able to understand this.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
For example, for school children, 16 or 17 years students, they are getting compared from other students. Like they are getting better marks
Hmm.
from you. The parents and the teacher also making them pressurized to get that marks. But
Yes.
instead of pressuring them, they can motivate them to take that positively.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I
This
think
point is mainly stated for students, ma'am, who are getting suicidal thoughts.
yes. No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think your point again connects to Janak's point. So, yes, I absolutely agree with you here. Then, okay, Ritu says people do self harm to feel something as well. That is so true. That is actually very true. But this is mostly about non suicidal self harm. So let's park it and I will come back to this because we will talk about non suicidal self harm as well. But yes, Ritu, you are absolutely right. You're absolutely correct about this. Then, okay. I have another one. Talk therapy doesn't work for someone who has made several suicide attempts over a long period of time. Is this true or a myth? Again, generalizing that talk therapy wouldn't work for them is a myth. But now, coming to how to deal with this situation, if a person has made several attempts over a long period of time, then dealing with that person in that situation would become very different. It wouldn't be like when you just ask that person to come meet a therapist once a week. It wouldn't follow the same format. You have to take separate, different kinds of steps there along with talk therapy. Talk therapy is still extremely important to the process, but then that won't be the only intervention. So it does work, but not in isolation. Okay, medication can treat suicidal intentions. Yeah, that is definitely a myth because medications cannot treat suicidal intentions because it's a thought problem. What it can do is a lot of times when people have suicidal ideations, it is either because of severe depression or it could also be in cases of certain kinds of schizophrenia, right? In those cases, if suicidal ideation is present because of an underlying psychological disorder, then as you use medications to treat that psychological disorder, then in itself the suicidal ideation would also be impacted. So that way medications can treat it, but if it is not connected to a disorder, then medications can't really do anything about it. All it can do is, if it's an impulse control problem, it can help with that. But the thoughts that you are feeling, those are your own. Your medications cannot actually change your thoughts. It can just help with the symptoms, with the neurological symptoms of it all right. So okay, Bunny has a question. Is it necessary for a person to have suicidal thoughts or ideation if they are doing self harm? No, it isn't, Bunny. And good question. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I'll talk about non suicidal self harm in a minute and then I'll get into this. Yes, and then Fatima says talking about suicide or asking about suicidal ideation as a taboo. Yes, people do look at it as a taboo, which again becomes a very major problem. Okay, now I have another question. Okay, all right. So I have one question. Can medication side effects cause suicidal tendencies? Uh, I do not think so. And even if it can't, even if it can, I don't think there is enough research or data on this. So I would refrain from answering this. As per my knowledge, I don't think so. But do not take my word on this. Then, okay, isn't suicidal thought comorbid with psychological disorder? Yes. So again, this is also, we will come back to this also in a moment, because the answer is yes and no. We'll come back to it. Then just meets is one of the biggest myths is that people with mental disorder commit suicide. Absolutely. But the fact is that people who commit suicide have common reasons most of the time due to unfulfillment of expected outcomes. Yes, I think what we can say is that the biggest myth is that people who have mental disorders, they're the only ones who commit suicide. They're not the only ones who commit suicide. People can commit suicide without having any mental or psychological disorder. This is also the answer to what Tara said, that isn't suicidal thought comorbid with psychological disorder? Yes, there are, like I just mentioned, there are a lot of psychological disorders, especially severe depression, even certain kinds of schizophrenia. And also, when we talk about borderline personality disorder, these are certain disorders or certain conditions that does impact our suicidal ideation. But that doesn't mean that people who only have these conditions can have suicidal ideation. A person can have suicidal ideation without having any psychological disorder as well. All right. Again, Shruti said, is suicidal ideation always connected to depression? So I would say no, like I just mentioned, not always. So, okay, I see Ritu's hand is raised. So, Ritu, what would you like to ask or contribute here? Ritu, would you unmute yourself and let us know? Okay, all right. I think Ritu has changed her mind. So we'll continue. If later, Ritu, you want to add anything, please feel free. Okay, so I think the three major myths that I would like to talk about, and most of them you guys have already covered, but I'll still quickly go through it. First is talking about suicide plants the idea in a person's mind. I'm sure you all also must have heard about this. Also, by talking about suicide is such a taboo, like someone mentioned. We say, oh, don't talk about this. But the fact is that actually open conversations about suicide can prevent suicide, because what happens is when you talk about it, you provide relief, you provide validation, and you encourage people to seek help. The more you talk about it, also normally, even if we let's keep suicide in the corner for a minute, right? Even if we talk about normal stress, pressure, tension, any kind of problems in life, we all know that when we talk about it, it provides relief, right? That is what basically catharsis is. So, how would suicidal ideation be any different? Talking about them and providing a person with a safe space to actually come and speak about that is going to encourage them to seek more help and feel better. So this is definitely a myth. Second one, that a lot of you, I could see a lot of comments regarding this in the chat box also. So that is why I thought I'll address all of this together here. That only people with mental illness can attempt suicide. So, like I said, that no, people who attempt suicide do not always have a diagnosed mental health condition, right? There can be a lot of problems, relationship problems, life stressors, or they could be, you can also not. I want to actually ask this question to the counselors and the psychologists who are here. Have you ever felt this, that a lot of times you might have a client, right? And it is more common than not that the client might not have any diagnosable disorder at all, but that doesn't mean that they are not struggling with something, right? So like I remember while I was doing my MPhil, I actually had this conversation with one of my colleagues where she was like, there was this particular client who had come, and that particular client's cousin was coming to me in the OPD. So we had this discussion and she asked me, so you are seeing so and so's cousin, and does he actually have a problem? So I'm like, what do you mean by actually have a problem? She's like, does he actually need therapy? I'm like, if he is coming for it, then that means he needs it. He's getting something out of it. He's talking about it. So yes, so she's like, no, because like his Cousin came and I did all the assessments, I completed everything, and after detailed history taking and assessments, I do not find anything. So when I asked him why, what was the reason for him to come, he said that, oh, my cousin was coming, and I also felt that I could also be helped by this. So that is when I actually paused and I thought about that. I thought maybe, especially when it comes to clinical psychologists, our training is such that we are forced to look at symptoms and diagnose people. But people can seek help without having a diagnosis. People can have severe issues without a diagnosis. People can feel that, okay, I am overthinking a lot these days, I'm feeling really stressed, but not have enough symptoms to be diagnosed with anything at all. Same thing happens with suicidal ideation also. They need not be diagnosed. Now, coming to severe depression, yes, in case of severe depression, suicide becomes a problem, because a lot of times in case of severe depression, people do think about it. So when you know, when a client comes to you and you know that the person has severe depression, so it's very important for you to check whether the person has suicidal ideation or not. Same thing in schizophrenia, especially when it comes with paranoid delusions, then it's very important, or paranoid delusions, or also auditory hallucinations. In these two cases, it is very important to check whether the person has suicidal ideation or not, because in these two cases, the chances of having suicidal ideation really increases. Now, again, in case of borderline personality disorder, it's also one of the symptoms there, that people do have impulse control issues, they do indulge in a lot of self-harm. So it's very important to see whether they have suicidal ideation or not. But that doesn't mean that these are the only people who have risk to suicidal ideation. All right. Then another thing is, people who talk about suicide won't really do it. Right? This is again a very major myth. That is not true. Like someone mentioned, that it's for attention seeking. Right? So it's the same thing. Oh, you're talking about it. Jisko karna hota hai, wo kar lete hain. I'm sure you all must have heard such statements that, oh, if a person really wants to commit suicide, the person will just go and do it. They won't come sit here and talk about it. That is not true at all. If someone is actually talking about this, we have to take it as a warning sign, because something is going on in their minds. And again, coming back to the previous point, let's assume an off chance they are just talking about this with no intentions of doing it. Still, it what do we have to lose if we give the person with all the support, all compassion, all the help that we have to offer? We have to assume that, okay, if a person is talking about it, this person actually means it, because if we assume otherwise, we have way more to lose. All right, so are myths versus facts clear? Can I see a thumbs up? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So, yes, I've not forgotten about the self-harm bit, non-suicidal self-harm. We will talk about it once we are done with going through the whole suicidal aspect, right? So now, when we talk about warning signs and risk factors, now I think we have conversationally discussed most of them. Okay, I see something in the chat box. 1 second. All right. What is the most common warning signs of someone considering suicide? Okay. Now, the most common warning signs are actually listed on the screen, right? So it's like talking about wanting to die or to kill themselves. Definitely, this is not to be taken lightly. Then expressing hopelessness, like I mentioned, and this is what happens in case of severe depression as well, that there is this overwhelming feeling of hopelessness. So in life, we carry on living. Why? Because somewhere we have a hope for a better future, a hope of something or something to look forward to. So if a person is expressing hopelessness, it becomes a very major warning sign. Then withdrawing from friends, family, and activities. Again, the intensity matters. How much they are withdrawing. Were they a very social person earlier? Because if someone was never social, then it's just their nature, their personality type. But if you see a major difference in the way they used to interact earlier, now they are interacting, especially after a major life event, this can be a very important warning sign. Then if a person talks about feeling trapped or being in unbearable pain, okay. Okay, so someone mentioned that I seen alcoholics and substance abusers, when there is relapse, client experiences suicidal thoughts. Yes, yes, Shraddha, that is a very important point as well. Okay, so let's talk about that. We will come to that when we talk about mental health disorders, right? Because also substance abuse is also seen as a disorder. So we'll come to that in a minute. Okay. And also here it's mentioned increased use of alcohol or drugs. Now here it is mentioned as a warning sign. And what you have said is something different. I will address both of that. Wait, here, why is it mentioned as a warning sign? Because now think of it, it's increased use. That means basically is saying someone who was earlier not abusing alcohol or drugs is now suddenly abusing alcohol or drugs a lot. So, what does that show? It shows two things. First thing is that maybe something really major is going on in their life or their mind, something that they're not able to cope with. They do not have healthy coping resources. They do not know what to do. So instead, they are taking the help of substances. Like I'm sure you all must have heard a lot of times people talk about this also, that substance abuse is not a disorder, it's a symptom. A lot of times people also say that there is some deeper reason why people resort to this. So if you feel that there is increased use of alcohol or drugs, this could mean that the person is actually struggling, right? Then dramatic mood changes is definitely there. Okay. So there is this another question that, based on your first point, some people use humor as coping mechanism as well. How to differentiate their so-called jokes from the actual intentions? Now again, if someone is joking about suicide, you cannot take that lightly, like I've mentioned over and over again, because we never know what the person is going through. It can still be a joke, but it is important to seriously follow up. And how to do that, we will get into that in the next slide. But a lot of times we cannot differentiate, and it's okay if we cannot differentiate. We are still supposed to make sure that we take the right steps. Okay. All right. So then dramatic mood changes. Okay. So these are warning signs. All right. Now let's come to risk factors. So do you all understand the major difference between warning signs and risk factors? Can I see a thumbs up? Do you understand the difference between the phrases and warning signs and risk factors? Or would you like me to elaborate on what the difference between warning signs and risk factors really mean? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Okay, all right, perfect. Right, so these are the warning signs. Now, when we come to risk factors, number one is obviously previous suicide attempts. Okay, like someone also mentioned earlier, that if someone self-harms or tries to attempt suicide and if it does not work, they wouldn't do it again. That is not true. If they have done it before, the chances of it happening again is there, and we have to take it very seriously. Then mental health disorders like depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and certain types of schizophrenia is there. Now here also, if a person is using substances, right, or is an alcoholic or substance abuser, and then they have a relapse, in that case, why can they actually think about suicide? Now think about it that way. There is a person, like you remember we spoke about expressing hopelessness. Now a person who has been addicted to a certain substance, and when your addiction reaches a certain level, it impacts all aspects of your lives, right? So after a lot of attempt and a lot of hard work, a person can finally actually quit. When that happens, it starts building their self-esteem, because the way they used to view themselves when they were addicted to something and people used to view them was very different. Now their self-esteem is building. They believe that, okay, I can do this, I can have a better life. Now, suddenly, when they have a relapse, it tells them that I can never have a better life. No matter what happens, I'll fall back into this trap. And if I'm falling back into this trap, then what's the point of carrying on? So, in the case of substance abusers or alcoholics, when they think of having suicidal thoughts, or when they have suicidal thoughts in case of relapse, this is the rationale in their case. Okay, now another risk factor is obviously history of trauma or abuse, then lack of social support. That is always there. That is why also when certain clients come to you, certain things that you have to check is, do they have, and I'm sure you all are aware also in our questioning, we also ask about their social support system or their family, their friends. I usually always ask about who all know that they've come to therapy. Are there any people in their lives who know exactly what they're going through or somewhat of what they're going through? And how did they respond? How often can you reach them, and how much do they understand you? How comfortable do you feel talking to them? These are important things. Understanding, do they have other people around them, right? Then of course major life transitions or losses, that is definitely there. Like for example, we spoke about failing in an exam, or in a lot of cases also divorce, breakup, losing a spouse, losing a parent, losing a child. These things can obviously be major risk factors. All right, so these are the major warning signs and risk factors. If everyone's clear on this, can I get a thumbs up? I see raised hands, I'll come to that, but before that, can I get a thumbs up? Okay, all right. Okay. And before I come to the raised hands, there are two other messages here. One is, based on your first point, some people use humor. Okay, sorry, this is the same message. Okay. So, okay, Ritu, you still have your hands raised. Do you want to unmute and add something, or is this by mistake?
Actually, ma'am, I want to ask that some people have that suicidal DNA. Like, it's not that talking about genetic type of thing, but I think they have a history. Like, parents have done suicide, died by suicide, and then suddenly that children died by suicide as well. So, what I want to ask is, ki in that emergency, like not that we have consent of other people, but as we see them to doing something suicidal thing, like jumping off the bridge, वैसे वाली emergency वाली thing. तो उस वे में हम तब जाके कैसे help कर सकते हैं उसकी? तो that's what I want to ask.
Okay, all right. Now, in case of emergency, there are two major ways to deal with this. Okay. Now, the first is, when we talk about emergency, how close is the person to actually doing that activity? Now, for example, if you see that they're extremely close, the first thing is to make sure that they don't do this, right? That you get them back to safety. So that is how do you talk them out of it, to make sure that you maintain a degree or a distance from them and the thing or the substance or the tool that they are choosing to harm themselves with, or if they are standing at the ledge of a bridge like you mentioned. So first would be how to bring them down, right? You don't even have to maybe tell them that, okay, you don't even have to go deep into it. It's just about that moments of distraction. That's the first step. You don't have to go deep. Just moments of distraction where you can just bring them down. You can just, it's about that particular moment, that distraction. And once that happens, in case of emergency, the best way to actually deal with this is something that we are going to talk about in detail later, is hospitalization. Hospitalization becomes very important in case of emergencies. And why it becomes important and how should we deal with it, we will get to it later. Okay, Ritu, is that okay? Okay, all right. Now there is another hand raised. Sri Kansha. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
I'm Sri Akshaya, ma'am.
Sri Aksha. Okay, so sorry. Yes, Sri Aksha. Tell
Ma'am,
me.
I just have two questions to ask you. I have known a person who is addicted to alcohol. Due to family's pressure, he is controlled without using alcohol. But he's again addicted to the drowsiness of cough syrups and other syrups, which is making him to feel drowsy. Is it considered as substance abuse?
Yes, it is still considered as substance abuse. And because the thing is, and also it clearly shows that he is trying to make himself numb because he doesn't want to feel something. And
Yeah.
so, yes, it is definitely considered substance abuse.
Another question is,
Hmm.
if the suicidal thoughts is considered genetic thoughts, like because father is died due to genetic, I mean, a suicide of a person, and the son also is died due to suicide.
Yeah.
Is it considered genetics?
Okay, so that is actually a very interesting question. So here, latest researchers do talk about genetic component in suicidal ideation. So it is found out that there is some sort of genetic component in suicidal ideation, but there is not enough research there to support it because, like we all know, that correlation isn't necessarily causation. So here there could be other aspects also because we do understand that there is major genetic component to a lot of psychological disorders. So it could be that because of the particular psychological disorder that was in the parents and might be in the children or some degree of it, that might have contributed to the suicidal ideation. Number one, it could have been this. Number two, it could have also been that since you have seen something, so you are exposed to that, and once you are exposed to something, in a lot of cases, either you feel that okay, this is something that I can never do, or as a child, this thought unconsciously can come to your mind that if things get too hard, this is an option, this can be done. So it could just be an example of social learning as well. As per the genetic component, there is research going on. People do suggest some, but there isn't enough at this point to actually add more on that, or we do not really understand how it works.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, yes, Janak, what would you like to say?
मैम जैसे ना आपने बताया था कि कोई पर्सन है वो उसमें जैसे स्ट्रेस में होता है, जैसे ब्रेकअप है या बच्चे की या उसके बेबी की डेथ हो गई है उसके हस्बैंड की, इस टाइप से, तो उन लोगों को उनके मन में आती है सुसाइड करने की कि इनके बिना हम रह नहीं पाएंगे। तो मैम उनके लिए कोई थेरेपीज वगैरह होती है मैम जो उनको हम प्रोवाइड कर सकते हैं?
हाँ, डेफिनेटली उसमें ग्रीफ थेरेपीज होती हैं, डिफरेंट टाइप्स की थेरेपीज होती हैं, बट अब उसमें जाने के लिए वो तो पूरा ही अलग टॉपिक है।
जी नहीं, वो तो फिर नेक्स्ट कभी सेशन होगा उस बारे में, देन बस मैं ये जानना चाहता था इस बारे में, और मैं पढ़ूंगा फिर इस बारे में।
होती है, आप देखिएगा, आप ग्रीफ थेरेपीज के बारे में पढ़िएगा, होती है।
जी, थैंक यू सो मच मैम।
Okay, all right. Okay, so now since a lot of people are doing this for professional reasons, so here I would like to add, now you've seen the warning signs and the risk factors. So if you see these warning signs and risk factors in your clients, it is extremely important for you to talk about this. Number one, first, you should do a scale of suicide. You should use scale of suicidal ideation. That is something that I use with my clients whenever I see that there are warning signs and risk factors, to understand the degree of the ideation and to understand how to proceed, what to do next, right? So before we get into that, I would want to get into the ask model, because ask model is normally for everyone, right? You do not actually need to be a professional. This is something that we use to deal with anyone with suicidal ideation, okay? But you can also adapt it for professional users, and how to adapt it for professional users, I'll cover that as well. So when we talk about the ask model, A stands for ask directly. So when you see the signs and the symptoms and the risk factors there, what do? You're supposed to ask directly. Talking about suicide does not increase suicidal ideation. As I've mentioned earlier, that's a myth. If it's a friend, or a family member, you can ask them that, are you okay? Are you thinking of harming yourself? If you are, I understand, it's okay, let's talk about it, I want to know what's going on. If it's a client, you use scale of suicidal ideation, you understand their ideation. All right, and you make sure you either rule it out or you understand that it's there, and then you proceed with caution. Then S stands for stay with them. Now, obviously, if it's a friend or family member, it's just very important for you to make sure that you're around them. You do not leave them alone. It is extremely important. Either you are there, or if you cannot always physically be there, so it's important to make sure that someone is with them physically. Now, if you are a therapist or a psychologist in this case, so you can obviously not stay with them, but here your first responsibility is, this is where confidentiality does not matter. Your first responsibility is to inform their parent or their primary caregiver or whoever has come with them, or you ask them for, a number. So here what I usually do, this is also an important aspect. I'm not sure if this happens everywhere, but the right way to go about this is that when there is a person who comes for therapy, when you take all their information, it's also important to have their emergency contact. And it can be anyone that they feel comfortable with, but it's important to know that person and their relationship, even if they don't want to involve them in the therapeutic process at all. Because in case of an adult, they don't need to involve someone, but just to make sure that there is that contact if there is an emergency. So in that case, it's a responsibility to contact that person, let them know that this person might have suicidal ideation, and it's important for them to stay with them to make sure that they are not alone. Right, now let's come to K. Keep them safe. Again, now when we talk about people, what we do is, if we're talking about our family members or our friends, make sure that there are no dangerous substances around them. There are no knives, there are no ropes, there is nothing that they can actually use to harm themselves with. All right, that is the first thing we can do, and make sure that someone is around them all the time, to make sure that they, even if they have that thought in that moment, they do not have the things to actually harm themselves with. Now, in case you're a therapist or a psychologist, what do you do in this case? You make sure about their living condition. You make sure you tell all these safety steps to the person, to their primary contact, to their emergency contact. You understand their living conditions. If they live alone, or if you understand the intensity of the suicidal ideation is extremely high, that is where you recommend hospitalization. Okay, and why do we recommend hospitalization in cases of suicidal ideation? This is something that is very important to understand. Why? Because number one, if a person is inside a hospital setting, they cannot or will not be able to commit suicide. It is just to keep them safe. There is no other reason there. Okay, but number two also, while they are hospitalized, the right way to go about it is not to just keep them hospitalized and then finally release them. That's not going to solve anything. But keep them hospitalized so that they are safe, and then continue in-house therapy with them. And once you feel that the risk for suicide has come down drastically, that, and you know that there are others also outside to keep in touch with them, to take care of them, that is when you release them. Okay, but another very important aspect, and especially in Indian context, is the fact that this is something that I have also seen while I was doing my MPhil, right? What used to happen, a lot of times people used to come with suicidal ideation, especially severe depression and suicidal ideation, and they were hospitalized. But what is happening there? Nothing. Some therapy here and there, okay, great. Nothing of consequence. They're hospitalized, so they can't really harm themselves. Worst part is they have been given ECT. Why? For severe depression. The hospital situation is very grim. There is nothing good about most psychiatric hospitals in our country. When I say not good about, I don't mean that they're not professional, qualified people. I mean the environment, the walls, the bedding, the staff, the food. If a person is actually feeling suicidal, wouldn't that person want to be in a place that actually livens them up, that makes them feel comfortable and warm? So in this case, who are you really helping? What are you really doing? This is something from my personal experience that I would never recommend. So when I talk about hospitalization, it's also important to understand what kind of hospital are we talking about. What kind of rehabilitation center are we talking about? What kind of treatment are they going to do? Are they going to do ECT? Are they going to start with therapy? Is there enough space for them? Are there recreational centers there, or are they just going to keep them locked up to make sure that they don't do anything? Because just keeping someone locked up is not the solution. It is temporary solution, but you have to essentially make sure that they get better. So I feel as a therapist or a psychologist, it becomes an ethical responsibility to understand what kinds of areas, what kinds of hospitals or rehabilitation centers are around us. How do their process actually works before we recommend someone hospitalization? This is something that I want to add about because I feel very passionately about this. I have seen people really misusing it. And I think change can only happen when individual professionals also understand it and at least make that shift in their practice and try to be a bit responsible about that. All right. Okay. So now just a bit on active listening. This is also something very important because when we talk about active listening, I'm sure since you all are counselors, that's why I skipped this, because you all already have counselors, psychology students, you already understand what active listening is about. But the reason I'm back on this slide is I want to talk about one very important aspect here. Okay, now of course active listening is about maintaining eye contact. You're supposed to nod affirmatively. You're not supposed to interrupt the person. You're supposed to let them speak, and you're supposed to actually listen, not just hear, but listen, understand what they are saying. You reflect on what they said. You ask them that, okay, it sounds that you are feeling blah, 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 blah. And would you like to add on that? Did I understand your emotion correctly? You're supposed to keep on asking them to make sure that you're actually understanding what they're saying. And it's extremely important to avoid any sort of judgment or to offer any immediate solution while you're listening, right? Because that breaks a train of thoughts, that doesn't really validate their feelings. It completely invalidates their feelings, and it makes them feel like no one understands them anyway, and now the therapist is or their counselor is also not understanding them. So if the therapist and the counselor also acts the same way people in their life do, then how does it matter? What difference does it make? Right? And it is extremely sad. I have heard so many stories about this. I've seen a lot of times my clients also come up to me and tell me certain horror stories of people that they've been with, and they say these exact things, that this person started explaining me that what you're doing is wrong, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't feel this way. And then the client was like, I already have a mother, I did not go to get therapy to get another mother. So it's also very important for therapists and counselors to always remember that you don't have to be like everyone else in their life. This is supposed to be their safe space. So now when we talk about empathy and validation, the main point I want to talk about. So we have to validate feelings, right? So how do we validate a person's suicidal ideation? We cannot validate their suicidal ideation. We cannot say that, okay, yes, I understand what you are going through and it makes sense. In your case, it makes sense to feel this way. Because the moment you say this, you're basically telling them that, yes, go ahead. But that is not what you're trying to say. So how do you validate them with, at the same time, making sure that you are not pushing them in the wrong direction? I want to get some answers from you. What do you think? Anyone has any thoughts on this? How can you validate someone without pushing them in the wrong direction? How do you validate a person who has suicidal ideation? Anyone? Okay, yes. Yes, Shivani?
Maybe it's just the thing that you can tell that, I hear you. I know that you are being distressed since long and going through a certain phase in your life, and it has been difficult to you. So maybe just agreeing to what the client is saying and making him or her feel that you are actually understanding that pain will probably make the client also feel, I mean, it will be a good connect with the therapist also, and the client will feel that he or she is heard.
Okay, yes, absolutely, Shivani. And I also got similar response on the chat box also. Isha says maybe first acknowledge the circumstances, reason that led to the ideation. Absolutely. Then Chumuki says, Sakina first says, validate the emotional experience. Okay, I think that is absolutely accurate and so important that when we talk about validation, in this case, we are not validating the thought, we are validating the emotions. We are validating the emotional experience and what they are going through. And like Shivani just mentioned, saying things like, I understand what you're feeling, instead of saying things like, you should not be feeling this way, or, oh, you are so young. Why do you want to waste your life talking about this? Think about your parents. Like these are the statements people usually say. Think about your parents. Think about this person. How can you say that? These are the phrases that we have to refrain from, because what these phrases do is these phrases reinforce the person's belief that no one understands me. So you cannot ask a person to think about their parents or others when they are suicidal or when they're having suicidal ideation. This is something that I've heard a lot of times, and I'm sure you all also must have heard that people say, ki, oh, this person was so selfish. Only selfish people commit suicide. This person could not even think about his or her parents. Now, here, the person is not really selfish, because if you think about this, humans in general are programmed to be selfish like all other animals. We all have survival instinct. When this person is not listening to their own survival instinct, when the survival instinct has died, someone that we, at the end of the day, we always say that even a mother would save her own life before her child's, if it comes to that. She will try to save her life, her child's life, but if it comes to that only one can survive, the survival instinct goes in that way. You have to go against nature to do something otherwise. So this is in itself going against basic human nature. So imagine a person has reached to a level in their lives where they do not have their survival instinct anymore. So how can you call this selfish? They have touched the rock bottom here. They are not thinking clearly. They do not have the cognitive abilities anymore to even have or even form those associations. So this is something that is very important to always remember, and always remember this as a therapist and counselor as well, that these statements cause more good than harm. So, this is what is important when we talk about empathy and validation, to refrain from these phrases and validating their emotional experiences, but being extremely careful with the words you use. You cannot say, if you say that, okay, I understand how you are feeling, you cannot say that, okay, yes. If, for example, a person just talks about a suicidal ideation, a lot of times we mindlessly say some things, right? So if a person just talks about it and we say, ki, okay, this makes sense. Now, the moment you say this makes sense, they would think, okay, my thinking of committing suicide makes sense. That is how you have to draw the line. Instead of saying, yes, this makes sense, someone actually, Chumuki points out a very right statement. I am trying to understand how you must be feeling. So he's like, okay, all right, I'm trying to understand how you must be feeling. So can you elaborate more on that? When did these thoughts start? Okay, okay. A lot of times, all you can do is say okay and nod. You can just use active listening and just validate by your expression instead of using words, because at times silence is way better than wrong words. And okay, we have another response. Tara says, I agree with the way you are feeling. However, there may be another way to sort it out, and maybe it's worth giving yourself a chance. Yes, this is fair, but this has to come at the right point. First, actively listen, understand, and this comes later, not in that moment, because if it comes immediately, they might feel invalidated. Then Riti says, I can understand what you are going through, but this is not the best way to deal with it. Now, again, if you say this is not the best way to deal with it, what does it do? It reinforces their fear or belief. If someone has this belief that I'm doing everything wrong, mostly when people think about suicide, they're actually believing that everything that I do is wrong. So instead of jumping into that, you can say, okay, I understand what you're going through, but I want to understand more about this. So let's talk about it. You just open dialogue. You refrain from saying anything till you actually reach towards the end of it. You have as much information about them as possible. So, like I said earlier, that once you have more information, you can understand what can trigger them, what won't, how to use words. Yes, okay, maybe making them realize how important they are. Definitely, that is important, but in order for you to make them realize that, first, again, active listening, understanding where they're coming from, understanding everything they're doing, and how they feel, how their thought process works. And then from taking inputs from the information they've given you about their lives, you can help them see how important they are. Oh, yes, absolutely. Client-centered therapy models, unconditional positive regard, maybe. Absolutely. This is what I was waiting for, and someone actually typed in the chat box. Client-centered therapy models is what works here perfectly. Unconditional positive regard is very important, because when a person is feeling suicidal, there are already so many cognitive distortions. The person cannot, their cognitive abilities have been impacted. So if you try to do a CBT, REBT, or any of these cognitive behavioral therapies, they are not in that stage to actually listen and restructure their thoughts. So that's where active listening, empathy, validation, and positive self regard comes. Yes, absolutely. That is very, very important. All right. So I think because I wanted a very interactive session, so we have been doing personal stories all along. So I don't think there is a need for this separately, because we always spoke about examples and everything. So here I will take the time to talk about non-suicidal self-harm. As I mentioned it earlier, some of you also asked about it. So when we talk about non-suicidal self-harm, it's basically self-harm without the intent of suicide. Now, this is extremely common in adolescence. And again, there is unfortunately not a lot of research on this, but I would also like to talk about this because this was actually the topic for my dissertation when I was doing my MPhil. It was patterns of non-suicidal self-harm amongst Indian adolescents. Right. So briefly, to give you all a brief on how this actually works, it's mostly the motivations are very different for non-suicidal self-harm compared to motivation for suicidal ideation or suicide. Suicidal ideation, suicide is clearly you're trying to end your life. Non-suicidal self-harm is usually a very harmful coping mechanism. It's like when a person feels a lot of pain and they're not able to understand what to do with that pain, they might resort to self harm. It might come out of hatred or frustration or just not knowing what to do. And what happens is when you harm yourself, there is some sort of release. And once you start feeling that release, it distracts you from your original emotional pain. And that is why it can become addictive, it can become a habit. And so lot of times what happens is people, when first they do non-suicidal self-harm, they say that, okay, I felt a lot of relief after that. Second time they say I felt a lot of relief after that. And third, fourth time, the relief also keeps on decreasing. So then their intensity of self-harm and how much they are harming themselves keeps on increasing. This is where it can become extremely difficult. This needs to be dealt with introducing positive coping mechanisms in their life. It is supposed to be treated as any other addiction, because a lot of cases, non-suicidal self-harm can also become a risk for actual suicidal ideation in life. As they grow up, as things become worse, it can turn into actual suicidal ideation, because one thing that once gave you relief and it stops, you try to test your limits. And then when nothing helps, it might result in hopelessness, and then you might have actual suicidal ideations. So I think in this short time, this is the brief I could give you all on non-suicidal self-harm. Is everyone clear on this? I hope I answered the questions that I had in chat box related non-suicidal self-harm earlier. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I already exceeded the time, but I'm glad that I did, because everyone was interactive. People were talking, sharing. So it took us time, and it's great. And this is all that we could cover in the 1 hour that we had. So before we end this, these are obviously available resources, right? That you can actually go to. These are the 2 helplines that actually work. Most of the helplines do not work. I have tried them myself. I was actually trying to figure out that what kind of resources can I show in the end? And it's very sad that most of these helplines, even the ones that are given on Google, if you actually call them, no one's picking up. So that is there. But yeah, these two helplines worked, especially when I called them. Now I don't know if they actually work 24/7 or they don't. And then of course you can go to your local therapists and counseling centers, but this is only in case of continuing help. But in that moment, if someone needs it, it's important to call someone, because if you just have someone to listen to them in that moment, it can delay their impulse, right? And once you delay their impulse, that is when you can actually start with the proper therapeutic approaches. So this was basically from my side. And thank you everyone for being here today. So before we end, I'd just like to know if anyone has any specific questions or any doubts or anything that they'd like to add. And I'm also reading the chat box here. All right, Chimuki says, there's this thing which I'm seeing in young children. One child does something to give her pain, then her friend also starts doing the same. I've seen this in my school. Yes, that is very fair. That is there. But also, it happens because of lack of proper coping resources. And when a child does something, the person feels that, okay, this can also be done to feel better. In a lot of cases, it's just, again, modeling. It's modeling, it's social learning. And unfortunately, good aspects and bad aspects both can be modeled, both can be adapted. So that is why the environment really matters. So, yes, that is the correct observation. But in most cases, it is not just a fad or a trend. Like people say that, oh, now it's become cool to self-harm. It's not just that, it's deeper than that. It's lack of actual resources and just mirroring and copying unhealthy ones. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Shri Aksha, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name again, but thank you. Then Saraswati says, I have one situation in my mind that if a person just the position on doing the suicide, like he or she is standing on the roof and we are not present there physically. So in that situation, what can we do? Okay, so if you're not present physically, you are supposed to inform people who can be there physically or who can reach there immediately. Meanwhile, do not hang up, keep on talking, make sure they are distracted, make sure it's just about buying time in that situation. Nothing else can be done, just buying time and make sure that someone reaches there immediately. You can call the local authorities, you can call the police as well, but try to be on the phone till then. Yes, Apurva, I see your hand raised.
Hi, ma'am. It was a lovely session. I just wanted to ask if like someone is alone and that person doesn't have any sort of support system, you know. So how do we apply the ask model there?
All right. So if the person is alone and they do not have any kind of support system, so like I said, in that case, you become their primary person, right? As a therapist or as a friend.
But
Or as
then again, we cannot be there like 24/7.
Yes, exactly. So in that case, that is where hospitalization comes in.
Okay, ma'am. Got it.
Yeah, this is where hospitalization comes in.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a lovely session.
Thank you so much, Apurva. Thank you. And yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed the session. I also really enjoyed tonight and I liked how interactive everyone was. So thank you for making it a success, giving your insights, and keep on using the, you all kept on using the chat box. So thank you so much for that. And I hope we all learned something today. So thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone have a great night. Before that, sorry, I have one last request. If you all could just turn on your cameras for a minute so that, you know, we can just click a picture to remember that this did happen and we all were here together. So that would be great. Okay. If I could have a few more people, please turn on your cameras. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Ma'am. Good night, ma'am.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Hope to hope to see you all again in some other
Yes, ma'am.
workshops. All right. Good night.
Good night, ma'am.
Good night.